Long story short, and I get back to this, Joe Biden didn't remember signing an executive order. He didn't remember signing an executive order. The one and only, the man of the hour, the man I love to talk to, Mark Sleboda. He's an international relations and security analyst. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay this evening?
Jamarl, I'm fine. I'm alive. Thanks for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be on the show. And I got to say that actually probably, once again, President Trump is probably the man of the hour, but, I'll take it anyway.
He is indeed going to be the man of the hour. Whatever, around 5:30 this evening, Donald Trump will once again be commander-in-chief, president of the United States. He says one of the first things he wants to do is talk to Vladimir Putin in order to arrange an in-person meeting at some point. Give me your take on that. I mean, what are your thoughts on this meeting that they're talking about? I know you've been a bit more cynical about him ending the war, and I agree with you just because it all boils down to what does it mean to end the war. But give me a take on this kind of meeting and this kind of conversation that took place. He also had one with Xi Jinping yesterday, apparently. But give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it is significant in that the U.S. president and the Russian president haven't spoken since 2022, right? I mean, at late 2021, maybe, right? So, I mean, a lot has happened in the world other than the conflict in Ukraine. And the conflict in Ukraine has left us, in a situation where U.S. and Russia are in a de facto war with each other, right? The U.S. doesn't admit it. Right, Russia certainly, with the U.S. missiles flying into Russian territory, they're certainly aware of it. And the reason we are, not now all radioactive ashes is because of the sanity and restraint of the Russian president of the Kremlin. So talking is good. And Russia is open to dialogue. They're eager to return to discussion and dialogue. The U.S. has a lot of the U.S. foreign policy elite, including the political class in general, has come to view that they are so exceptional that diplomacy is a reward that they grant to their friends or those that they are courting, but you don't talk to your enemies. And I have to say, looking back in history at the great diplomats Bismarck and others, that this is a radical distortion of the idea of diplomacy. I haven't read the article yet, but I just heard that I've been referring to Antony Blinken as the U.S. Secretary of War for years now, and I believe right. The New York Times may have just referred to him as that. An article in the New York Times. So that is that. It's great that the New York Times caught up with me, at least on that rhetorical device a few years later. But dialogue, discussion, the willingness to talk to each other between the Russian president and the U.S. president is a good thing. Is that going to change the conflict in Ukraine? No, not in the slightest. But it is a start. And even if the U.S. and Russia can't come to any type of agreement, which seems extremely unlikely to me in the conflict in Ukraine, there's a lot of other things in the world going on that they need to talk about as well. Yeah. So it's a good thing that they're talking, right? It's a good thing that they will talk, that they will arrange. A phone call is a good start. A face-to-face meeting, okay, that's good too. But I don't think that Donald Trump, the great deal maker, real estate deals in New York are not high geopolitical diplomacy, and then I'm not quite sure that he has. I'm not quite sure his madman theory of diplomacy, where if you don't give me Greenland, I'll invade it, is going to work it may work with Denmark and the EU. I don't think it's going to work with the Russian president, though, especially because the U.S. has so little leverage over Russia at this point. The Biden administration, if they had any weapons left to give that the Kiev regime could make use of, that would in any way change the situation on the battlefield, where the Kiev regime is now losing badly and at a ever gathering pace. The U.S. would have given it already. The Biden administration would have given it, and so, there's no way that any U.S. president, Donald Trump or anyone else, can agree to the terms that Russia has set for their SMO at the beginning, and have been pretty clear that that's the only way this conflict ends. That is what peace looks like, and that will leave Donald Trump being told no. Right? Russia's not interested in a ceasefire. We've had ceasefires before. There were ceasefires with the Istanbul communique. There were ceasefires with the Minsk agreements, and they were simply used as an opportunity to rearm, retrain, and regroup the Kiev regime's forces. Russia has no interest in a ceasefire unless if it is in the situation where the Kiev regime is withdrawing all of its forces from the remainder of the territory of the Donbass, Kherson, and Zaporozhye in Ukraine, and has agreed to re-enshrine neutrality in its constitution and a few other measures, with regards to Russian language, political, and religious rights in Ukraine. That they will be met. That there will be a process for dealing with them. And those are the terms. Obviously, that is not something that either the Kiev regime will agree to, or that the U.S. is capable of agreeing to as well. So that leaves us at a point where we're not interested in a ceasefire. We're not interested in a Korea-style armistice. We're not interested in dividing up Ukraine and putting NATO, European NATO troops on the ground. Like you lost, so we're supposed to just give you victory. I don't understand how that works. When he becomes the U.S. president again, Donald Trump owns this war, right? The U.S. is in a war with Russia, and they're on the losing side of this war. And now he owns it. And if he had the political capital and the will to just wash his hands of the affair and say, I don't like Zelensky, I don't much give an F about Ukraine, and I'm just going to walk away and blame it all on Biden, and Russia can do what they want, that would be great. But I don't think that as the U.S. president, he can do that, right? Robert Kagan has already, been writing in the pages of the Western mainstream media, laments and saying that Trump will lose Ukraine. Trump will hand, if he doesn't do this, if he doesn't escalate to de-escalate, right? That's already the mantra being put forward. The Russian president is going to say, look, it's nice to talk, right? But niet, thanks, but no thanks. If you can't meet our terms, you're not ready to meet our terms, we'll continue on the battlefield. And we're not afraid of new sanctions, right? We're not afraid of any. You've sanctioned us. You're now sanctioning the rest of the world to try to force them to stop trading with us, and you're not having much success with that either. You haven't had any success with sanctions. You started sanctions against us, back in your presidency, even before that. I mean, Obama started a little bit. Trump vastly accelerated the sanctions last time. Joe Biden went to full-blown sanctions war, right? Mm-hmm. And the Russian economy is still growing. It's growing. It has grown at a faster clip in the last few years of the SMO than the United States economy has. So, the Russian GDP jumped that of it for purchasing power parity, jumped that of both Japan and Germany in the last few years, putting Russia in GDP per purchasing power parity as the fourth largest economy in the world. They jumped Japan and Germany, right? Yeah. The Russian salaries average salaries are increasing. Yeah, there's a bit of inflation too, but that's part of that is simply because of the rise of Russian salaries as well. And the Russian central bank is actually increasing the interest rate to try to tamp down. They don't want inflation to increase any faster. They actually want the Russian economy to stop growing so fast. They don't want it to overheat, right? That's the new hope, but it's not anything of that critical a situation. The Russian economy, considering everything that has been done to it, by the U.S. I think I've seen that there's like 14,000 rounds of sanctions against Russia or something ungodly like that.
Yeah.
It's a testament, to that of how important what Russia has to offer the world is, and how much that the U.S. And Europe overestimated their own economic power and control in the world. So sanctions aren't going to work. There's no new weapons. If they teased sanctions relief, that would be nice. The Russian government actually much doesn't care. They're certainly not going to, if they didn't sacrifice their goals in Ukraine for the imposition of sanctions, they're also not going to sacrifice them for the promise of removing some of them. And the process of removing sanctions is incredibly complicated in the West, right? It took decades for the Jackson-Vanik sanctions to be removed, even after the Soviet Union collapsed, right? So Russia's basically of the mindset that these sanctions, for the most part, exist forever, for the foreseeable future. And Russia has adapted to live with them, right? They trade with the rest of the world. They don't trade with the United States. They don't trade with Europe. And it has made the Russian economy stronger and blackmail proof, right? The U.S. can no longer exert that kind of leverage, geopolitical leverage over the U.S. So with no leverage, what does Trump have to go to the table with, right? He threatened to sacrifice more Ukrainians on the altar of U.S. saving face. Okay, Russia's been doing that. However, unhappily for the last 3 years, and they will continue doing it. So I just don't see that this conflict ends anytime in the near future. At some point, it will become undeniable by both the Kiev regime and the West, including the United States, that Ukraine is defeated. But it may take taking Kiev or further Lvov, the Polish border, or Odessa to get them to that point. And Russia's certainly willing to go that far. And the former, a very important Russian political figure, he was formerly the secretary of the National Security Council, Nikolai Patrushev. He's now the head of Russia's growing shipbuilding industry, kind of a reward job in retirement for something that actually was his original specialty. He said that, well, if this continues through this year, then the Ukrainian state may cease to exist.
Yeah.
May cease to exist, right? Which means Russia will just say that, all right, you've left us no options. We didn't want to do this, but now we've just got to take it all. And that's the only thing that will guarantee peace for both us and for the Ukrainian people.
I saw that.
We're going to regime change the regime change that you installed in 2014, and that will be the end of it. And then we'll just deal with guerrilla war and whatever else consequences. But I just, unfortunately, I don't see that Trump is able to meet Russia's demands, and I don't think Russia is able to is security willing and politically able to compromise on their goals much. Everything the headlines of the New York Times today are about Korea-style armistice and ceasefire, right? Two things Russia said no and no. I mean, they were pretty adamant, multiple Russian figures, right? Including Putin himself, Lavrov, Maria Zakharova, the Russian speaker of the upper house, the Senate. No ceasefire, no Korea-style armistice. None of that is happening. So, I mean, this is just the Western political class and media talking to themselves still rather than talking to the Russians. Well, Trump will at least change that, but I'm not sure that he's going to like what he hears.
Mark, I am going to take an optimistic view.
Okay.
I'm not going to let my cynicism get the better of me in this. And I'm
a
going to say,
professional cynic, so
yes, you are. And so I'm going to take the opposite point of view in this, and I'm going to keep an open mind. And I'm going to say that the people who are around him know exactly what you just said, meaning those people like RFK, Tulsi Gabbard,
and Mark Rubio, and Mike Waltz, and Hexit.
That is true, but if you listen to what Rubio was saying in his confirmation hearing, or if you listen to what Donald Trump was saying when he was giving a speech, and he was framing it in the terms that Russia has described it. NATO was always a red line. It was understood that NATO was a red line. Like this
that is an important data point, and
yes,
it is a key change that
is not
hasn't
something
affected the Western narrative yet, but it does change the position of the U.S. president, and he recognizes that the advancement of NATO into Russia's backyard, he can understand why Russia would be upset about that. Right?
Exactly.
That right there is a simple admission of reality and fact that the entire Western political class and media have denied like a matter of faith for the last 4 years going on.
And it sets the context by which a framing by which he thinks about it. I can discuss it. And just like you just said, they have no leverage on the ground. And not just have no leverage on the ground. Donald Trump has taken a strident position. I'm going to end the war. I'm going to end the war. I'm going to end the war. And this is Joe Biden's war. Joe Biden did this war. This is Joe Biden's war. This is Joe Biden's war. Meaning it sounds like he's setting a context by which to give himself leverage to pull out. Now, I could be wrong in this. You could be totally right in this. I hope I am right in this. And I hope he's like, this is Joe Biden's war. Whatever it takes to end it, we're going to end it. Full stop.
So, just tell me what you think that looks like.
I don't know. I can't tell you that. I don't know. Because I'm stuck with the same. Look, at my deepest roots, I'm also cynical about it. Because I know Russia's not going to freeze it. I know it's not going to be this nonsense like we're going to make a Korean style, but that's going to be completely rejected. Any rump state of Ukraine that's left is going to be filled with weapons. And so short of them coming to terms of Ukraine is neutral, I don't know what it looks like. And that neutrality could be washed away with the next president. So
Ukraine had neutrality enshrined in their constitution up until the U.S. backed Putsch in 2014.
Exactly.
And then overthrew the government and changed the constitution to say, now we're no longer neutral. In fact, our constitutional aspiration is to join NATO. Here's another problem is how does the Russia trust anything the U.S. says? Right?
That's the other issue.
The anti-ballistic missile treaty, the short intermediate range nuclear forces treaty, the New START treaty, the JCPOA with Iran. Trump was the one who pulled out of that after it was enshrined. The 2 rounds of Minsk Accords enshrined in a UN Security Council resolution. The Istanbul communique, the January 21st agreement, back the power sharing agreement in Ukraine as a result of the Maidan, back before days before they completely seized power. Then right that was also just thrown away. How does Russia trust anything they sign? Because I got to be frank, I wouldn't wipe my butt with anything that a U.S. president puts his name. And I don't think the U.S. president would do it either. I think they would, be intending to force Zelensky to do it. Well, Putin has been clear that they don't consider Zelensky the legitimate president of Ukraine, right? I mean, never mind everything that's happened since 2014. His term has expired. He's only continuing with the powers of the president because of continued redeclarations of martial law in the country. And Putin is not thinking about what happens just next month, but what happens in 2 years and 5 years and 10 years. And if the next Ukrainian government government that is a descendant of the current regime, even without Zelensky, says anything Zelensky agreed to had no real legal value because he was just he didn't have the legal authority. He wasn't the real president. That's Russia's position there. And likewise, even with the United States, right? If they sign something with Trump, if Trump verbally agrees to it or even signs his name on it, what happens when the next U.S. president? What if Kamala Harris wins again in 4 more years, right? Or Chuck Schumer or some other, or Mark Rubio, right? Then where Russia is winning this war now. They don't want to give time to rearm and retrain and raise a new generation of cannon fodder for Ukraine and fight it when the West may be better prepared to fight this war another 5 years down the road. They're going to finish it now. There's absolutely zero reason for them to agree to a Trumpian ceasefire. Zero reason. So then where does that leave? I mean, I just don't understand. This Trump just say, this is all Joe Biden's fault. I'm going to stop giving weapons and money to Ukraine, and whatever happens, happens. Is that? I mean, can the U.S. president do that? I don't think he can.
Oh man, I don't know. I mean, like I said, I'm taking it as an act of faith. I mean, I accept everything you said is true. I've made the exact same arguments that you're making now, so it's not like I don't know that stuff. I'm just trying to keep. You want to? I'm on the hopium. I'm trying to keep a little bit of optimism.
I don't do hope.
I'm not calling it hope. I'm calling it
the carrot dangled before the mule to keep it plodding along. Take the carrot away.
Is there any way, like in your mind as you frame it, is there any way to make where there's a middle ground where both find a face-saving mechanism where Trump can say, I ended the war. I said I was going to end the war. I got the best terms I could for America. Now, again, let's assume for the moment that he knows what you just said is true, that they have no leverage in this process. And the moment that you have no leverage in the process, it makes no sense to continue in the process we have no leverage and look worse over the course of time. I mean, part of my logic goes into that too. But is there any middle ground? And I want to read one thing to you. So Time Life, who has not necessarily been the kindest to Zelensky, came out with this. It says, quote, "We were deliberately not talking about territorial parameters," says Eric Green, who served on Biden's National Security Council at the time, overseeing Russian policy. The United States, in other words, made no promise to help Ukraine recover all of the lands Russia had occupied, and certainly not the vast territories in eastern Ukraine and the Crimean Peninsula taken in the initial invasion in 2014. The reason was simple, Green said. In the White House's view, doing so was beyond Ukraine's ability, even with robust help from the West. That was not going to be a success story ultimately. The most important objective was for Ukraine to survive as a sovereign democratic country free to pursue.
That doesn't even make any sense, though, because they could have the Minsk agreements. The only thing under the Minsk agreements, the only territory that Ukraine lost was Crimea. Right? Mm-hmm. That was taken in 2014. The whole purpose of the Minsk agreements was to push the Donbass, the DNR and LNR, back into Ukraine, but under conditions that would politically reconcile the events of the overthrow of the Ukrainian government in 2014, right? And give the Donbass broad autonomy, right? Which, as well as securing their language and cultural rights, religious rights, political rights, and everything, would also, by the way it was formulated, give them veto power over Ukraine joining NATO. But Ukraine would have survived as a state. The only thing they would have lost was Crimea, right? They wouldn't have even lost the Donbass, much less Kherson and Zaporozhye, and now probably Kharkov and soon Dnipropetrovsk as well, right? They would have had all of that. They would have still been able to associate with NATO, right? Now it's not even, now there's no de facto NATO, right? Yeah. They would have been able to join the EU. Now Russia's written that off the table as well. If the goal was survival, the U.S. under Joe Biden could have pushed for fulfillment of what he agreed to in a UN Security Council resolution. So
come on, that's not the goal.
Is a completely false argument.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't the goal.
It is a lie.
I mean, the goal was to stick it to the Russians. I mean, let's be honest. But I guess my point is,
they were going to regime change the Russian government. They thought they were going to crash the Russian economy. They thought Vladimir Putin would have been driven out of power, and they even had fantasies about Russia shattering as a result of the political and economic shock, and then divvying up parts of it into smaller pieces. They really believed that.
yes,
Going into 2022.
through economic shock, though, or for that matter, losing on the battlefield, but not necessarily, meaning the Biden, and I've read articles like this before that pointed out the Biden administration had no belief that Ukraine was going to win, nor did they have a real belief that Ukraine was ever going to be able to take back territory. The entire point was to avoid direct conflict with Russia, meaning from NATO and Russia, without the bellicosity, that they didn't necessarily want to go in direct war. They wanted to keep NATO allies united, and they wanted to stick it to the Russians. And so I guess my point is, assume for the moment Trump knows all of this. He's briefed on all of this. Is there any middle ground where both can save face, where Russia accomplishes its objectives, it does everything that it wants to do in regards to the conflict? Ukraine is neutral, government is fundamentally changed, the Russian language is ensured, whatever the Russian people who are there, the language and their rights are ensured. The territories of Russia are now part of the Russian Federation, remain under the Russian Federation.
And recognized by the United States as such.
Russia is not going to get everything it wants. But I guess what I'm saying is all
the sanctions are removed. Right? No, there's no way any of that happens. There isn't. There is no wiggle room right here. Right. So as far as Russia is concerned, the Lugansk, Donetsk, Crimea, Kherson, and Zaporozhye are constitutionally part of the Russian Federation. There is no way politically for the Russian president to walk away from that even a smidgen. Right. That doesn't happen. And it's even enshrined under what specific borders. They can't even say, all right, well, we can redraw the borders of Kherson to leave out Kherson City on the west. No, that's not possible. It not only an enshrinement of neutrality in the Ukrainian constitution, but some form of, I don't know how anything is even made legally binding with the United States. That's part of the problem, that the U.S. says that Ukraine will never join NATO. This would be the constituent actor of NATO saying that NATO expansion to the east is done.
Yes.
Effectively,
that's what Russia wants. It wants the security architecture of Europe.
That's not going to happen. There is no way there's going to be the fundamental change of the Ukrainian government, including returning the political and religious and language and cultural rights to ethnic Russians. The government in Kiev, not just the president, right, but all through the security services, the governorships, the Rada, the Kiev regimes, they're all Banderites. I mean, they're riddled with and not every single person, but that is the ideology under which the regime operates under, right? Their principal part of that fascist ideology is hatred of Russians, right? You can't fundamentally change the Kiev regime in that way without removing the Kiev regime. And the only way to do that is to drive them out of power, block by block, street by street, meter by meter, which is what Russia has been doing for 3 long years now. So I don't see any middle ground. That's the part of the problem. I don't see any way for the U.S. to save face other than Trump saying, it's all Biden's fault. I'm just walking away. And I just don't believe he can do that. Another option that the Trump people are floating around is, Ukraine doesn't join NATO for 10 years, we kick it down the road, and that is another thing. So Russia, no ceasefire, no kicking the can down the road, no half measures, no continuation of the Kiev regime. None of that is all that it supposedly Kellogg and the other people involved in this within the Trump administration are talking about. So I don't see any hope for. I don't believe in hope. I don't see any signs. The positive data point is Trump recognizing that the expansion of NATO has led to this war. But can he change the reality of the U.S. position with regards to Ukraine? And even if he did, the rest of Europe, I mean, the United Kingdom just signed a absolutely absurd rhetorical 100-year security. I don't know. Why not just make it 10,000 years? You know, why not? You know, to the God Emperor of mankind. You know, I mean, absolutely absurd stuff with zero substance behind it. But that is him trying to deny Trump, right, the ability to end, to even think about ending the conflict, right? Because of course, the United Kingdom is the special relationship supposedly with the United States.
Look, I would say that the UK and Europe don't matter. I mean, I mean, come on, like they have become such weak vassals. That I, honest to God, don't think they matter. I think this boils down to what the U.S. wants.
Maybe simply the fact that we're a lot closer to Europe over here than to you, at least in the yes. Okay, Alaska and Russia are this close, right? I mean, right. But that's the other side, right? The Europeans do matter, unfortunately, and the U.S. The vassals will be in revolt against their master again, right? Just like they were before. Trump hates the European leaders, aside from Orban, right? And one of possibly, right? And they hate Trump. It's going to be the Trump chaos bomb is going to go off in two places right now, as far as I can see, right? The transatlantic relationship, where already he's threatening to take Greenland away from a NATO ally, which I'm sure is just madman posturing, and he'll be happy with increased U.S. basing rights or something. But I mean, and the other one is he intends probably to make war on the deep state itself. And maybe the best hope is that the Trump administration and that D.C. is so involved in its own looming internal political civil war that Russia can take advantage of the situation and just create more realities on the ground. But that's, we'll see how that plays out. But it's still not a deal. It's still not an agreement. I don't think that this ends with a piece of paper signed between Trump and Putin. I don't.